Welcome to the Future Generations Podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve to do better now and for our future generations with your host, Dr. Stanton Hom.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and this is an exciting episode. I love this man. I love you, Ken. I love what you have contributed to the world. I love what your wife has contributed to the world. I love how human you guys make everything, despite being a Hall of Famer, despite being able to co-host an amazing podcast with the legend John Stockton. And I am excited to speak with you for a multitude of reasons, as we shared right before we hit record. But I would love our audience to get to know Ken Ruettgers. I'd love them to get to know you both personally and professionally.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here with you, Stanton. And I got to tell you, I am so grateful and thankful for the work that you've done. And of course, I think it was the Health Freedom Conference in San Diego. I think it was your third one that my wife Cheryl spoke at. And I had never been to a health freedom, any kind of, and I thought, this is going to be so weird. I don't know, kind of new in this space. And I'm like, oh my, and I got there, I was a little nervous, a little anxious, and not quite as anxious as like game day, Packers Bear games,
of course not,
or USC UCLA game, but football. But and I tell you what, it was awesome. The people were incredible. The information was amazing. What you put together, with the different call them vendors, but people that were there to provide information and products and resources. And man, my hat is off to you and your team. Thank you so much. You guys are warriors.
Thank you, Ken. This interview is about you, so thank you.
I know, but I mean, it was like an eye opener for me.
I appreciate that. Ken's talking about Heart of Freedom 3. That was back in December 2021. That was the peak of this podcast. That was the peak of so many things. And I would say, I'll just put it this way in perspective. You're from California. You kind of understand the landscape. You guys are in Oregon, right? If I'm not mistaken, you guys are in Oregon. So if there are arguably two states that have been absolutely ransacked by this tsunami wave of medical tyranny, it's ours. And when I flew to Oakland about a month ago, when I went through the airport at San Diego, I was like, wow, I was impressed because it was like normal. There was no mask, there was nothing. There was maybe one person that I saw. And then you land in Oakland and you're like, oh my gosh, it is a completely different environment. And there's not just one out of maybe 4 or 5 people, but there were groups of people that are still kind of in that mix. And so I believe that you guys came in at the perfect time. Your wife shared with us. I loved what she shared with us by rehumanizing these injury stories. I believe we have made such an impact, and I don't think it could have been possible without what you guys have shared. And so I really appreciate it. And we couldn't have done it without our amazing team, but without the amazing people who actually were able to share with us. So I appreciate you back.
Definitely a team effort. Yeah, it's good to be here with you.
Ken, I'd love to start maybe with that perspective, because I know you're working on a lot of things, Voices for Medical Freedom, which I definitely want to talk about. You guys were some of the first. And I think I first got connected to your wife through our good friend Miles Grimes.
Yeah.
You guys had almost co-universes about sharing about the reactions from COVID-19 vaccines. And but I'd like to talk maybe back when Cheryl was going through what she was going through, maybe the heat of the injuries, and maybe share your perspective from the husband side.
Sure. Well, so, she was doing social work and, a lot of pressure. If everybody remembers back, a lot of pressure to, not a strict mandate, but a pretty pressured informal mandate to get vaccinated. She got online. She looked and tried to do as much research as she could. She talked to her doctors, and they were like, And I talked to a couple of my friends that had already taken the shot that worked in police and military, and they were like, yeah, fine. So she went ahead and took the shot so she could continue to work. She was right in the middle of an internship, so she would have had to have completely started that internship completely over again had she opted out. And so she came home the next morning. She started getting swollen lymph nodes around her throat and her neck, and then it started to pain and tingling up the back of her scalp, and then it just continued into her arms and the rest of her body. Went to within the first couple of days, ended up in the emergency room, and the doctors didn't know what to do. We were stumped, of course, that she got a neurologist. The first neurologist she went to, she did all the testing, the MRIs. Maybe they said, hey, maybe you've got MS, right? But my wife did some research. She goes, no, I don't think so. I mean, this thing happened right after the shot happened, and boom, it's like it just came upon me. And so the doctor said, well, all the MRIs and X-rays and everything say negative on MS. So she said, I think what you should do is you should try taking the second shot and see what happens. And my wife, laughed. She thought, and the doctor was serious. And so she's like, I'm done with this neurologist. I'm going to see another neurologist.
It's crazy that it's almost an inherent gaslighting, right? It's an inherent gaslighting in a sense of like, hey, by the way, I think this happened. Like if it was you, I mean, we could even draw a similarity to like CTE and everything that had the NFL has been under watch for the last couple decades or so, right? And you watch Will Smith's movie, and you watch the cover up, and you watch all these things, and you're just like, how is it that we can take from one incident to like a cause and effect, right? Like people say causation doesn't equal correlation, or correlation doesn't equal causation, but I think we're there now. Like I think it is clear as day, like the science that's coming out, and I don't even like to call them anecdotal. I don't like that word. I think they're just stories. I think they're just stories about a person's unique experience, and then a doctor just says, well, just give it a shot, just give it a shot because and then we'll know. And you're like, and then you give it a shot. And what if it's a worse outcome and it's not really on, whose watch is that on, I guess is what I'm saying. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, with the litigious society we live in, and of course, gosh, everybody seemed to be indemnified by liability through this whole COVID thing. It's just, and even just thinking about the vaccine itself as a product, no other product in the United States is free from a lawsuit, and yet is protected, which is just absolutely crazy. But going back to your point on, it's fascinating, mysterious to me how we so easily accept peanut allergies.
Mm-hmm.
Peanut allergies, and yet to think that all of a sudden, and of course there's no vaccine where someone hasn't been affected by in past vaccines. So this new experimental gene therapy shot that was rushed to the market. I mean, why I'm mystified as to why we'd be surprised by that, other than of course the level of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And people that we tend to rely on most and trust most were saying safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective.
So tell me a little bit more about that experience, because your wife shared something unique, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. She shared that when she started to share what her experience was, that your family largely just came together. I've heard, when we talk about gaslighting, we talk about questioning, we talk about divisiveness and polarization of even families. I thought it was such a powerful story to hear that you guys all just at the very first just listened, heard, respected her experience. Could you share more about that?
Yeah, so we have two daughters. Both of them are married, and her mom lives in town and in the same town up here in Oregon, in Central Oregon. And yeah, everybody just listened, came together. It's very empathetic. They did some of their own research, and of course, yeah, it was very fascinating because we have some extended family and friends that thought, well, that's ridiculous, or they were curious, but curious from a distance. And I still have some family members, extended family members on both sides that are still taking boosters. I mean, within the last month, and I'm like, are you crazy? Especially now with all the information that's out there. But yeah, no, we really pulled together. And we were talking, Cheryl and I were talking within the last couple of days, I think this morning, and one of our daughters was over, and she said, yeah, one of the great things I can be grateful for in the midst of tragedy is that at least this kept, my grandkids and my kids, and from taking the shot. So
It's it's an unfortunate benefit, right? And and it's interesting because I would say, I mean, I've been in clinical practice for 13 years, and I remember I just met with the doc that I rented space from in my first year of practice by myself. And it's really interesting because some of the previous offices I was in, I was a little bit too vocal. I was a little too, radical to some degree, because I mean, my own experiences. I was in the military. I deployed to Iraq. I had 5 anthrax shots. I had smallpox injections, and I now know that they're all experimental. And I now know that the chronic illnesses that I had in my mid 20s were natural corollary incidences physiologically from that type of, environmental stimulus. And so I didn't realize that, after 13 years, you start to educate people, and then all of a sudden, like, that same guy asked me, like, well, why did you do what you did in the last 3 years? And I said, I just couldn't not. I've heard too many stories from too many moms who had been gaslighted from their pediatricians, and I've heard it over and over. But I was already doing my research long before I was in practice myself, and so before I had a patient, I was already trying to figure out why I was suffering so much, had to reverse my own stuff. And what I would say for you and your family, like, you guys did the single most important thing that I believe that this whole, if we want to call it whatever we want to call it, a psychological operation or the nefarious, corporatocracies that are pulling the puppet strings out there, like, you guys did exactly what they've wanted us not to do. They wanted to divide us. They wanted to polarize us. They wanted to pit ourselves against each other. And I really want to commend you. It's a vote to the family values that you guys, likely have just, immersed your children and grandchildren in. And I just wanted to commend you guys for that, because it's something that I don't hear enough. And it's something that I wanted to make sure that we highlighted, because I just think it's such a powerful testament for her, probably her healing as well,
yeah, I mean, yeah, it was pretty amazing. And we all rallied, and a lot of it at the first was just trying to figure out, how to deal with this, and is it getting worse, and what is it, and what's causing it. And then, of course, early on, she found Denise Hertz, who was a doctor that was retired and had just retired in Santa Monica, and they formed this group early on, and the group just grew and grew. And I think that was being able to find someone else, so you're not alone in what you're going through. And of course, like you said, having that family support was huge for her. Was huge for all of us.
What was it like for you, from your end, when that group was essentially deleted?
Yeah, well, they were part of different groups, but there was one Facebook group, because they were shutting down Facebook groups right and left, and the original group they had kept very small, and they were very careful, and it was private. And then they joined other groups that got pretty big, and they were public, and those all got shut down. And that's when they were so concerned about it that Bree Dressen, who eventually started React 19, and they're working on doing what our government should be doing,
They're
which
doing
is,
amazing.
yeah, which they're doing amazing work trying to figure out, they raise money to do research, to give research grants to try and help these people figure out the vaccine injury, figure out what's causing the problems, how to keep them healthy. And some of the money goes to people that need wheelchairs or walkers or assistants that have lost their jobs and can't put food on the table. So it's an amazing organization. But Brianne and I, we started the website let's see, what was it?
C19 Vax
Yeah,
reactions.
thank you.
Yep.
Boy, you know better than that. C19
I've been
Vax
following you guys
reactions.
for a while.
Yeah, and I started interviewing people early on and doing the video interviews, and then just splicing it down so that people could have a voice and could also know that people that found us could know they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that was one of the biggest challenges is people, that they were getting, like you said, gaslit by the doctors, mostly neurologists, and being treated like they had a mental illness or had anxiety, and they were being, hey honey, I think this is anxiety. Here, let me write you a prescription for Xanax. And it's like, no, and I think in large part, right, they were not told by the people who knew, the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, and the drug companies. They knew in the trials what was going on, and they did not tell the doctors so the doctors could help and treat their patients.
It's that website, I mean, whether it's it was Maddie's video that I thought was one of the most gut wrenching. Obviously, it was Ernesto's, especially because of the kids. But Ernesto, the way he tells the story is just such a beautiful man, just expressing like his best bud, like I thought that what you were working on was one of the most important displays en masse, right? It was getting to a bigger scale that obviously was a foundation for what's really, really, really making an impact today is remarkable. And so I really wanted to appreciate you for that, because I think even today, like even I'm at my daughter's nature school. I might even still have some dust on me. My kid might have some of her lunch on my hat. But it's a nature school. It's one of the homeschool that's really activated since all the things have really crushed public and private school here in California over the last 8 years, but definitely over the last 3.5. And I know the leader of the school follows me and appreciates everything that we do. And then a lot of the parents, they'll still, like, in a homeschool, they'll whisper like something about, oh, I like I'm wearing a Freedom Keeper shirt. I like your shirt. And it's like, what do you like about it? Like it's like I bring the conversation forward. I'm like, thank you so much, because I believe that advocacy can happen, in person, and advocacy can happen out loud, but advocacy can happen very, very quietly as well. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And let's make it more normal to just make this conversation not just out in the open, but very, very human. It's very human to have these types of conversations. And I think you guys did it better than most. And you guys made it very clean. You guys made it very thorough. And you did it both, right? You did a lot of the written testimonials. You did a lot of video testimonials. And I thought those were the initial, I could just tell, because I've been in this for so long, that we weren't going to wait for a documentary to come out. We weren't going to wait for, the video producers. And it wasn't like it was before, which was maybe a doctor knee to knee with a mom talking about a story about something that's really important, but then it doesn't really go anywhere past, maybe VAERS, maybe a book, and maybe a small conference somewhere. And then you guys were just really, really exposing a lot that I think made such a big difference for all of us today.
Yeah, I think part of it was we were the first ones in, and early on, and like I said, mostly women had found each other, and They had written, the White House and the CDC and the FDA without any response. They were worried about getting canceled. So I put and they had tried reaching out to the media, and they kept getting canceled and rejected. They reached out to politicians on both sides. And so we had started that. And I remember doing editing the interview with Maddie and her mom, the DeGarys, and editing down, because I just asked them to tell your story. I'd given them a voice, and just the value. You could just tell somebody that believed them, somebody that valued them, and then they had a chance to tell their story so other people could benefit from that. And I was editing Maddie's video interview, and of course, when you do that, you hear the same clips over and over, and you're putting them down to like a 3 to 5 minute short, and I just started tearing up. I was just so overwhelming to see what happened to this little girl, and nobody believed her. And the doctors had basically written a prescription to have her institutionalized into a mental ward. Her parents saved her. And I sat there with tears in my eyes thinking, you know what, man, if I was a politician, this would be the lowest hanging, easiest fruit, easiest people to get behind in the world. And all of a sudden, because I played ball for the Green Bay Packers and spent a lot of time, kind of my second home out of California was Wisconsin. And I thought, for some reason, Senator Ron Johnson came to mind. So I cold called him. And within a few hours, he ends up calling me back and asks about the story. And then he, on a Sunday evening, within a few days, gets on for 2 hours and listens to the stories with pen and pad in hand. And it brought Dr. McCullough in with him. And he told me afterwards that Dr. McCullough had texted him during the middle of these stories and said, "This is unbelievable. I have never heard anything like this. Is shocking."
Man, I just got goosebumps. I mean, even recently, I mean, he's still like hosting a lot of like, whether it's press releases or conferences, and just he's airing a lot of the facts about what's going on. And he was one of the early ones as well. And it's awesome how such a cold call can turn into something so impactful. And that's an amazing thing. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think people don't recognize that 30-second clip, or that, just that one video that you forward on Instagram or whatever it is actually, there's so much that goes into, so many dominoes that have to fall that lead to that maybe 12-hour event that you get 30 seconds of, that you want to share to the world. And it's like, in the end, it actually just came down to just who and who's willing to actually just listen and believe, and just give that voice that's being pushed into the corner, silenced, a stage. And then look at where we are now. It's remarkable, man. I think you guys are doing that though, right? Like you're doing that now with your Voices for Medical Freedom with John Stockton. When I heard John's, I can't remember which interview I heard of John first. My jaw was on the ground. I think it might have been with Bobby, but it might have been before that, because I was just like, because you start to hear Aaron Rodgers, you start to see Kyrie Irving, you start to see Djokovic, and you start to see these players, and you're like, whoa, this is interesting, like very plain and simple statements. And then all of a sudden, people aren't allowed in countries, they're not allowed, like they're the best in the world. And then you start to hear like the people who have history and who are legends, like yourself and John. You're like, wow, like this is, I just felt in my heart, I don't know what the right word is. I've been at a lot of these events where, like you said, I don't really know what a medical freedom conference is going to be like. And I've been to many of them where you're like,
yeah, man,
you're like, this is, no one's here, or it's like, it's usually just moms, kids, some docs, and maybe a microphone, or a megaphone or something, and now it's just the infrastructure of who's wanting to tell their version of their story, but also like their version of the whole truth, that if we actually listen and hear, oh man, we have a chance. It doesn't mean we're going to win, but it means at least we have a chance, you know? So I'd love for you to share a little bit about, if you don't mind me jumping to Voices for Medical Freedom,
Yeah.
a little bit about that, because I love the work that you're doing, and I love
Yeah. Well, so in 2021, the shot happened, and we did the, it was interesting when I was so excited when Senator Johnson said, hey, look, if you really want to do this and you're going to be kind of the tip of the spear, why don't you get some of the people interested, and we'll do a press conference in Milwaukee at the federal courthouse, because I'm a federal, senator at the federal level. And I mean, when I was so excited to tell everybody, because they've been trying forever, we'd all been trying to find, anybody that would take up the banner, take up the cause. And it was, it just shows you where we were and where we still are in this country to some degree, so divided along political lines, and the red team and the blue team, and the animosity. And so people were like, what, and but I'm like, hey, I don't care. If it's here's the thing. There's a really nice man in a red cabin, and we're out in the cold, in the snow, without a coat and barefooted. And this nice man's inviting us into his red cabin. I'm going in. I don't, and if blue cabin person wants to, we'll go there too. But so we went through that, and C19 Vax Reactions, was going, and interviews and stuff and then Senator Johnson introduced John and I to each other, and which was the summer of 21. And then they started implementing vax mandates for athletes.
Yeah.
The NFL jumped on, was the first league, but the schools at the college level were requiring vaccine mandates to participate, sometimes even to go to school, but certainly to participate in sport. And so John and I said, this is outrageous. Where's the freedom? Where's the bodily? Where are our natural and legal rights? You're talking about, things that we've solidified since the Nazis were doing experiments in World War II, with the Nuremberg trials, right? And so we decided, hey, let's get a group together, and let's see if we can get, so Mike Fisher, the NHL player who's married to Carrie Underwood, he and John and I started Voices for Medical Freedom as a way to inform people that have either entertainers, athletes, business people, military, inform them, and then encourage them, give them opportunities to speak out, and encourage them to speak out. And so, and then about a year later, we started a podcast to help people tell their story, give people a platform to tell their stories, but also, and we've had, three hospital nurses that were on ground zero that did an amazing, told an amazing, that had the courage and guts to stand up and speak out early on about what was really going on in the hospitals, who was really, being hurt in that hospital. We've had Ed Dowd on, and which I know, and Naomi Wolf and Pierre Corey, but we've also had a lot of people that have been injured or have lost loved ones, or we have one of the guys in our group, Kenny Maurer, who's an NBA referee, was mandated. And so it's been fun, as getting to connecting with people and giving them a platform to share their stories, and so it's been great.
I remember it was when the movie Vaxxed came out in 2015, and in response to the legislation in California, SB 277, where they were getting rid of the personal belief and the religious mandates, religious exemptions for childhood shots for school, public and private school. Like, people still today don't really know. They don't really know that, oh, wait, I can't go to public or private school if I want to choose whether or not my kids get shots. And they come into my practice, and it's like a bridge. Like I was explaining to my team yesterday, that some people are now on the bridge that are they're so awake that they're teaching me, like they're keeping me informed about things. So I have like my scouts out there teaching me things, and then I have people that are coming in that are wearing masks but also questioning shots, and you're like, interesting dynamic, because usually it's like black and white. I don't want to do any of these, these forced experimental medical products. And back then I thought it was remarkable because it was the alternative media that was popping up, and then it was the legal front that was popping up. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's game over. Like, we just went from this very grassroots to like a more there's more infrastructure to this grassroots movement. And I just remember following some of those athletes. Cole Beasley was one of them too. Like, I was just, I was watching, I was just like, oh my goodness. I was like eating popcorn, because it's like, dude, we've been saying this for so long, and these guys are like professional athletes. But I think it was at our event, I think you were sharing with me at the dinner before our event, and you were just like, hey, we're working on this thing, and like a lot of these athletes are getting attacked. And I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit of that background story, because, like I said, we see an Instagram post and we see Kyrie Irving not doing any, he's watching a game, and he, as a fan or as a suspended player, he has more privileges than he does as a player. You're just like in the same arena doing the same exact thing, and no one's talking about it, and it's crazy. I'd love to hear, like, if there are any like highlight moments that you've experienced.
Well, I think what's interesting, that for an insight in that space, it's guys, I think it's easier if you're a retired player and you're not a big social media guy. These players are so fearful, especially these young current players. I mean, I've been out for 20 years now, and the money is so big, social media benefits are so big. I was just back for a game a couple of weeks ago in Green Bay, and had dinner with the equipment manager who's been there for over 30 years, and he was telling me, just as a side note, this is how big pro sports have gotten for players, right? Is on Thursday, he says, we get all these boxes for these players that are like sunglasses and earphones and suits and ties, and if they get on social media, they get to keep the stuff anyway, but they get a bonus. They get paid for wearing this stuff. And the number one hit on the Packer website, the number one hit that people look at are what players are wearing when they get on the plane, when they get off the plane, when they get on the bus for the game, when they get off at the stadium. And that's, as you know, I mean, our culture has shifted so much, but so a lot of the retired guys are I mean, once you see what we've seen, behind the curtain in Oz, and the reality, you can't unsee that, and you can't not speak up. And so, but if you're an active player, a guy like, even like with Cole Beasley, he's very out there. But then, the other thing is, a guy like Cole, if you remember that first, that first mandated season, he said, look, I'm going to stand up. I'm not going to take the shot, and I'm going to go, I'll do what I have to do to jump the hoops to stay, free of this injection. And he did. And he made a statement right before training camp. And he said, look, here's my statement. Now I'm going to go focus on football. And what the sport requires is so competitive. And in order to achieve your goals, whether it's a team goal of a Super Bowl, or a personal goal like a Pro Bowl or something, then it takes all your energy, and that can be a distraction. Plus, if you're on a team, you don't want to be you don't want you to be a team distraction. But we have people that are in our group that some of them speak out, some of them do podcasts, others they're just kind of quiet, they're not sure, they're pretty nervous about stepping out. I mean, I remember after we did that, the press conference in Milwaukee, Bobby Kennedy called me, wanted to do a podcast, and the people in the group, the people in my wife's group were like, no, you can't do that. He's an anti-vaxxer. And I'm like, I don't know anything. This is all new space to me. I have no idea. I mean, I know who he is. He's the son of Robert F. Kennedy and the nephew of JFK. I mean, I know who the guy is, and I know what Children's Health Defense is. I know he's involved with that, but what is this anti-vaxxer label and stuff? So I did the research, and I came back to the group because they were saying, well, you were representing C19 Vax Reaction. And I said, look, I did the research on this guy. He's informed. He knows what he's talking about. He's a nice man that wants to hear my wife's story. I'm doing it. and I don't have to, I can disassociate. This is Ken Ruettgers doing this, not C19 factor reaction. So, and then of course, but it took a long time it takes a while, as you know. And I mean, I remember when we first started that C19 Vax Reaction website, I was getting 60 to 80 emails every night. I'd be up till 1 a.m. answering all the emails. Most of them were people that had been injured by the vaccine, and they were alone. And we would put them into groups, and we'd connect them with different people in different groups to help them, navigate this space that the doctors were gaslighting them all on. And but every once in a while, I get an email that would say, "Well, it's about time you join the party." And you know what? I had to be on. The first time I got one of those, I was taken back a little bit, but it was like, well, you know what? They're right. So I would say, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I should have been in this space, but I'm here now. And so we'll move on, and we'll go to battle together on this thing.
I think that's an important thing to highlight, right? Because I think at the beginning, like you're saying, people didn't make that bridge. They didn't know who Bobby Kennedy was because it had been for so many years, so silenced and so censored. Like before there was deplatforming, Bobby and Dell and a lot of those guys, and Earthly Wellness and Green Med Info, those guys were getting pulled off of MailChimp. They were getting pulled off, like their lists were getting deleted off of MailChimp. They were having Google Analytics completely changing their reach to their website. They were having Facebook, like obviously Facebook was deplatforming before deplatforming became so front and center. But I would say that I appreciate you sharing that because that's what happens, right? When you feel alone, you don't have really trust for anybody. And then it takes somebody like you to be brave enough to recognize, hey, there's an olive branch that's being extended my way, not realizing that those two worlds were going to have to blend. I remember saying that because it was before McCullough and a lot of those kind of bigger MDs. I remember saying early on, I made kind of a snarky post, and I just said, when these MDs bridge this story on COVID shots to childhood shots, then I trust them. I trust them. I believe they're going to carry the torch with us. And I appreciate so many of them that are now, because I mean, and this is from that same dinner. I don't know if you remember me mentioning this, but there were two women at that dinner before our event who are the original smallpox. Like their family, their parents resisted the original smallpox. So from that generation, who they go all the way down to my kid's age, that family lineage has no shots. And so at every generation of this movement for our own health and medical freedom, for our own sovereignty over our own bodies, there's 200 plus years of this. Like I think smallpox was 1743, the invention. And if you hear the stories about Edward Jenner and how he tested on his own family and his family died and he pushed it forward anyways, like you can't unlearn that stuff. No. And so these bridges, it then will always, like I said from the beginning, and it's why I wanted to have a conversation with you. It's about human beings being human and recognizing the humanity in that other person's experience, not dehumanizing them with these labels that are aimed to divide us. And what happens is you get the real unity, you get the real diversity in the unity that becomes really unstoppable. I really appreciate you sharing that, because these athletes, people say it the opposite, right? These athletes have it all. They're privileged, they're this. And you're like, yeah, and that's their experience, man. That's their experience. They have so much more on the line. Novak Djokovic has way more on the line than I do. We're both human. We're both fathers. We're both, in this, but I don't have multi-billions of dollars and I don't know how many people work for him, but that many people's livelihoods at stake. And then you say the one wrong thing and you're not entering in the country, it's like,
well, yeah. And I mean, that's what happened to Djokovic. But, I think what the thing you tap into as well is I think that's true for all of us though, right? I mean, how hard was it? Most of people I talked to, and probably a lot of your listeners were like, man, when I first stepped out into that unknown space of speaking out against the flow, I was swimming upstream. In this case with COVID, it was like swimming up Niagara Falls. I mean, it was
Yeah.
a lot of pressure. And, you know, yeah, the anxiety, the fear, the concern, what will that look like? I'm alone. I mean, there's some root human fears and anxieties about stepping out there. But once you do, I mean, it's like, really? I mean, I remember, stepping out into that space, and although I do remember, I mean, Johnson, like as we're getting ready to go, Senator Johnson, as we're getting ready to go to the press conference, he goes, "Now, you sure you want to do this? Because you're going to get some arrows." And he goes, "I'll take most of them. I'll take most of them, but you're going to get a few of these too." And I said, seriously. And Johnson, he grew up in Minnesota, so he's probably, as a young kid, maybe a Vikings. Well, I don't know if the Vikings were around when he was a young kid, but anyway, he's got that purple Vikings. And I said, Senator Johnson, seriously, man. I mean, I remember playing in Minnesota against the Vikings. Chris Dolman, a Hall of Famer, and I had just come back from having both my knees scoped and was still a little gingerly on it. And Favre was the quarterback, and we were in a 2-minute offense, and we just needed one touchdown to win the game. And I gave up 2 sacks at the end of the game. And then, of course, at the very end of the game, and of course, then you got to face the media after that, and your teammates and yourself. I said, this is a piece of cake compared to that. But once you step out in that space, and then the couple arrows come, and you're like, really? That's all you got? That's it? Come on, you can do better than that. That's all you got? But I don't know. I mean, I'm curious where do you think this whole thing is going? I mean, you were in it before COVID, and so you've seen pre-COVID grassroots movement, COVID movement, and then where are we going? Because it's a war, it's a battle, right?
I think that it's such an interesting analogy that you made, right? Because I deployed to Iraq, and actually it's Veterans Day weekend, and I got 2 buddies, two of my West Point buddies coming out. They're landing in 45 minutes, right? And I haven't seen one of them in, I don't know, at least 10 years. We're in Iraq together. We lost 5 guys together, and I would say that the analogy stands, right? Like when you've been through something like that, then it's almost like when in the face of what we're going through, let's go, right? Let's go and let's see. And then you're like, wait a minute, that's nothing like getting shot at. It's just not the same. But there is a fallout. And I would say that my family has been picking up a lot of the pieces over the last year. Thankfully, I'm in this field of natural health and self-healing, and so we know how to do this part. A lot of families don't. You guys have had to search for recovery for Cheryl, and so I understand all of that, right? And what I feel, to answer your question, I feel like unfortunately we have divided into 2 species, right? And I believe, and if you want to look at the vaccine alone, sure, right? An experimental gene therapy shot that's in essentially the bloodstream and potentially the genome for some people who are going to procreate the planet largely, arguably, who knows for how long, because we don't know, right? And I've seen this, right, clinically, in a sense that my practice has been a bridge. Families that are just open, like they want natural care. They see me as a pediatric and prenatal chiropractor. We then teach about the lifestyle that leads to better healing, that largely is away from the system as far as you can go. And then I have never had a family go back to the system. Like they learn more and more and more about this quote alternative natural world, and they don't ever go back and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to try antibiotics this time for my kids' ear infection, right? Like it's kind of like a one-way street that we've seen. We saw that in 2018, 2019, where the WHO came out with vaccine confidence ratings, and they came out with like oh my gosh, we are like an all-time low. And the movement into the quote anti-vax movement was like, at that point, was like 100-1. And then the research started to get a little further. I started to talk to more people, and they're like, no, it's like 500, 1,000-1. Like it is a mass exodus out of this system. And I think COVID amplified that. But I just saw that there's a news headline yesterday. My associate doctor was he goes through the headlines. I wish I just had videos of him going through the headlines, because he's just like he just has these funny antics.
Yeah. And that
Because
can be
he's
kind of scary too if all you're reading is the headlines these
well, you're
days.
only reading the headlines, and then he stops
Yeah.
and then he reads. But then when he reads, he's like, "Whoa, this is actually true." Like CDC reported that exemptions for childhood shots are at an all-time high, right? And my very first question was, "What's the actual rating?" And he was like, he's scrolling through. He's like, I was like, "I guarantee it's low." And he goes, "Huh, 5%." I was like, "Interesting, right?" Like, of all the all-time high, the exemption rate is only 5%. Idaho having the highest percentage of 12%. Granted, we know that the movement is an exodus out of that one intervention. I guess what I'm saying is it's going to be at least a century before we see a scale tip in a direction that actually is for this real movement for human freedom.
Mm.
I believe. I don't want to be that pessimistic. I just know that what we don't know is how powerful censorship is. What we don't know is how involved, well, we do know how involved these social media companies are. We know that the ability to build these alternative platforms and then populating these alternative platforms is a little bit slow compared to what the real world is doing. Real world, right? But I would say it doesn't matter. Like at this point, I was talking to a couple marketing people, because we just moved our practice and our home 30 miles. And that was a big part of our last year. And we had three hours with this team, and I was just going through all the things, whether just mostly the practice, but a little bit extension into our podcast and Hard Freedom, because I can't not separate those two. And I need them to know like the soul of who we are. And I just said, I, I don't I don't need the whole city of Escondido, 150,000 people. I couldn't even take care of 10% of the population. I
Right.
couldn't, right? In a year, I couldn't see anyone twice. Like just knowing the scale of my business right now. What we need are like 50 families. And 50 families, we know we can grow exponentially. We could build a radically amazing practice and community. And when we do that, and she was just like, that's not going to be hard. I'm like, it is going to be hard. It is going to be hard because of who we are and how we represent this wide breadth of how we bring people in. Like, people have to want that end goal, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's not going to be en masse. And I say this, and I spoke at a chiropractic school the other day, and chiropractic students, and I was one of these, right? Oh, we're going to change the world, right? We're going to change the world, because if people understand that the body heals itself, the whole world is going to change. And I said, we can't in my lifetime, right? And I was being more respective of time, right? Because I've been doing this 13 years, and I'm like, whoa, like we've made some probably more progress than we've ever made. But if we're only at 5% of kids, we got a lot of work to go, right? And then we don't understand the psychological operations and the brainwashing and how heavy they're gonna wage that. And so what we need to do is continue what you're doing. Like, you are taking some of the most what do you call it, like when you put people on a pedestal, these athletes, these entertainers, and you almost dehumanize them by making them into these deities, and you're bringing them down into this area where you're just like, hey, tell me your story, tell me what's going on. I believe that the future is going to be in the hands of those people who continue to do that, but also move people in that direction for greater freedom. I just don't believe that in our lifetimes, and I've said this from the very first episode of this podcast, it's literally been my mantra. I told this to a group of chiropractors the other night. I said, my mantra has been, what is the world that my kids are going to inherit from me? My kids are 4 and 1. They're young, man. Like they have a whole future in front of them. I don't want them like taking arrows, but I don't see a world where they don't take arrows. I see a world where they're going to have so much resilience and so much grit and so much groundedness in truth, but also this groundedness in humanity. And then we take care of our little parcels of land and our little areas of people and our small niche communities that then over time, I don't know why it's bringing up that movie Wall-E. I don't know if you ever saw it. It's like a little
Oh, the
little
little,
Disney
yeah,
film. It's a little robot guy, in the
yeah,
future, and everybody's like on a
yes,
spaceship. They're overweight. They can't walk anymore, and on the planet, that little robot finds a plant,
yes.
and they're just like, that's it. And they're just, it's the algorithm. The algorithm is to take that plant, take it up, and then it's the sign of life. And I believe that's all we need to win this thing. So I don't believe we lose. I just don't think we win in the time period that I
We'd
believe
like to, yeah.
we'd like to. And I don't believe we win in the way that we think we're going to. I don't think we're going to win on this, like, oh, we've taken the country back. Right. And that's tough for me to say as an American, as a veteran, right? But I think we take our collective communities back, and then these collective communities end up working in collaboration, recognizing that once you do that, right? Like I'm courting because we're all meeting each other after 3 years. I'm courting a beef rancher, a regenerative beef rancher here. I'm just people that are influencers and people in the community. And I meet them and I was like, oh my gosh, the collaboration, right? Like there's going to be a collaborative effort where people shift and change and move into the conversation of solutions, but they really recognize that the people that they're in person with, instead of going wide, we go deep. Right? Instead of going wide, we go deep, and in that depth, we then have the groundedness that I believe you guys have as a family. I think we're speaking to the same theme. I just wish it. I wish it was. I wish it was a switch where all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
kind of an organic solidarity between people that
exactly.
finally, that we need each other, and we need to help each other. And I would, it's one of the things that came to mind was I've heard it before, but I read the quote the other day about it said, say what you see, and more importantly, see what you see. And so, I do think it's going to be one person at a time, but it's going to be starting with ourselves and being able to make sure we see what we see. And then when we see it, be honest with ourselves about what we're seeing, and then to say it with grace and humility. Because if you say it with anger and with a demand and with entitlement, nobody wants to hear that.
Ken, I kind of want to throw that question back at you, right? One of the questions that I ask is I would love for you to future pace this world for me, given the work that you have done and the work that you are contributing to now becomes, gets the legs that it does and has the success that it does. What's the world that you are envisioning and aiming towards?
Well, I mean, I do think what you said about when I asked you the similar question about, I do because I teach a college level. I teach sociology at the college level, and and I've seen this coming for a while. I mean, I've been warning my students about the Chinese social credit score and the social control for probably about 7 or 8 years, and but what we've seen during COVID and what I'm hearing, from the World Economic Forum, from the World Health Organization, and it's part of who we are as humans in society. We're willing to give up freedom for safety. So I do think that there is the risk that the trend will continue into more social control, and you got to give the devil his due. I mean, there are people out there that are trying to enforce, and they're promising us more safety, And of course, I think it was Ben Franklin, that said, those that are willing to give up safety for freedom in the end up with neither.
Yeah.
But as far as for me, yeah, I think, continuing, regardless of the outcome in the bigger world around us, but I think for Voices for Medical Freedom, for John Stockton and I, and we both have a similar heartbeat for this, is allowing people to have a platform to share their stories, and a platform that will inform and educate people. And so I think that to continue that, which is really what C19 Vax Reaction was giving people a chance and giving them the value and the worth to be human and to share their story, like you're doing here.
I think the social credits, I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, I think that when we moved up to Escondido, I had our county supervisor came by and our mayor came by, and the mayor was freshly elected. And he gave me a platform, and I said, how much do you want to know? And I basically said, he's like, well, I just want to, I can't tell you exactly what he said, because I don't want to be forward about,
Sure.
what his perspectives on his own family. But then I just said, to some degree, he's a friendly, and I just said, unfortunately, I believe all things point to the social credit system and surveillance. And then immediately he started to send me, hey, check out this legislation. Check out this happened in Sacramento. He's like, these cameras, they're thinking about putting these in the city, and I don't think they're a good thing. I'm like, I don't think any of them are a good thing. I think many of them are probably already there, but I think it would be very valuable for you to pay very close attention to these types of things, because I think everybody's just taking it in, because it's kind of like these athletes, right? They get bombarded with all these potential sponsorships, bombarded with all these potential benefits. And then if you're a legislator, it's likely the same thing. If you install all this stuff, then we will reward you with tax credits and all sorts of things that are embedded, that in the end, I don't think we quite understand the power of that. But I think when it comes down to it, it will always come down to that. Like you're saying, telling the truth, seeing what you said, saying what you see and seeing what you see. Such a powerful distinction, because if you do that, like you said, with humility, grace, and humanity, man, I don't think in that small, sometimes one-on-one, but also potential one-on-many relationships, nothing beats that. We always win if we do that.
Right. And I would add, you don't need to be a John Stockton NBA Hall of Fame, two-time Dream Team gold medalist. We all have our circles of influence. We all have our relationships. I can't hit everybody in your world. You can't hit everybody, but we can hit the people in our own world. And again, and you'd said this early on in this podcast, that being able to humanize people and to interact and relate, have relationship, and to be honest and transparent, and share your own story.
Ken, well, I'll tell you, I think it is, because I look young, but I'm kind of an old guy. I turned 45 this week.
You're so old.
Your name means something to me. John's name means a lot to me. And I will tell you that it's one of those soul things that I get to experience, having you on our team and having you pouring into your community the way that you are, because I know that ripple effect. To be a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more uplifting, I don't think we can lose. I just don't think we win in the way that
not me. I think that's embedded within us, our freedom, our desire to be free human beings, together.
What would you say, if you have one more question? What's one thing you would leave us with? I believe you're speaking around it, but I'd rather just, maybe speak just directly to it. One action step that our community can take that would make.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of said it, but I'll sum it up again. I mean, you know what? I would say, if you could take one action step, share your truth, share your experience, speak, use your voice. That's the power we have is our mind and the ability to voice that, use your voice.
I love it. Thank you, man. I genuinely appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you've done for this movement. And I believe that you are evidence to me of the continued diversity of how this movement for human freedom is growing. And it's growing because it doesn't, like I said, no one goes back and says, oh, I'm all in on the social credit system, right? I'm all like, you don't,
No.
you don't go to that bridge and go back.
No, I mean, I think what you said about, once you get into this space and it's this journey, I'm still learning. I'm still
same.
I mean, I'm still learning about what foods to eat, not eat, and exercises in different types as I get older and hopefully a little wiser. And I just want to thank you too for your service and in the military and serving our country, but serving our community, our global community through your podcasts and what you do in the San Diego area. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. This episode is it's gonna hit a lot of people's hearts, and I can't wait to hear how it reverberates throughout our community. I really appreciate you, man.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Future Generations Podcast. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as more ways to inspire a brighter future for you and your family, visit us at thefuturegen.com. That's all available exclusively on thefuturegen.com.